Thank you very much for Beit Uri Tzvi for believing in us in the last 5 years. And after that, congratulations to Yirmiyahu and Nomi for the birth of their newborn daughter, Aleli Efrat. A big thank you to Yuda and Vision. Also congratulations to Abu Daoud in Hebron that his son was getting married, got married yesterday, pardon for my English. And to Eliran that now is in the IDF in combat duty, תשמור על עצמך ושמור עלינו, זה למצלמה יותר כי אתה לא פה. And thank you for the whole home committee, that you guys, without you guys, it wouldn't be possible. People that are in the land and outside, the Jews and the Palestinians, really, really grateful to work with each and every one of you. Be'ezrat Hashem, inshallah, the best is yet to come. Many thanks also to the photographer Solal, Kapara Alecha, and also to David, Noam, and Rudy that are somewhere in X, whatever. Maybe we wish them a good journey and come back safe. And especially thank you to the audience and the panelists over here for blessing us with your presence. Okay, now to the more spicy part. So, a little bit of what's going to be happening today. The door of the home is open for all opinion makers and people from right, left, liberals, conservatives, in order to create discussion that opens the door to create new ideas, to have new ideas emerging here, and also to create discussion between the family from a place of differences, not from a place of echo chambers or resonant boxes. So in order that we can clarify the future that we want to strive here, and also to have people that also contradict our vision, which is good, which is natural between the family to have machloket l'shem shamayim. And here's the place also to say that liberals who are supposed to promote the value of freedom of expression should be truly liberal and not censor, boycott, or disqualify those whose opinions do not suit them, but listen to them and have an ideological debate with them. Not saying someone specific, okay? And also regarding the nationalist conservatives who are supposed to love everyone who belongs to their people, should also, in the name of national solidarity, embrace those of their people who have different opinions of their own and not to generalize them as traitors or enemies. Now, the Middle East, and we are part of it, the laws in the Middle East and the rules are different from those of the West. Some people may think that the equation of territories in exchange for peace is the key to end the conflict. And that's fine. It's okay to think so too. But we in the home think differently and want to challenge this perception and open our door to be challenged about our ideology as well. In our region, peace is given to the invincible, to those who maintain their dignity, and to those who are connected to their identity. Every people have a unique story, and people without a story is not a people. The story of the Jewish people does not arrive from Tel Aviv, but from Hebron, Nablus, and Jerusalem. Without the heart of the land, we have no story as a people. And the entire land of Israel is an integral part of our story and identity. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a Jew, as you can see, or maybe cannot. And it's not my role to define for Palestinians what is their identity, which is for the Palestinian people exclusively to define. But Palestinian identity is also connected to the entire land and not only to Judea and Samaria or the West Bank. I have met hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians in my lifetime, and I can say with certainty that for 99% of them, the whole land is Palestine, which I respect. And in our region, respect is the key towards peace. Muslim, Arab, Palestinian respect is important, and so does Jewish-Israeli respect is equally important. And the first steps towards peace are to build trust, faith, and loyalty. Trust between people who are loyal to the aspirations of their people and out of faith in something greater than them. And combining these three is a kind of an art. In Hebrew, Sfat HaKodesh, Emun, Emunah, Ne'emanut, ze omanut. It sounds, can I get an amen? if anyone thinks that it is possible to move forward in resolving, and I know that everyone here, also the panelists here, no matter from what position, everyone here, because they are dedicated and devoted to create peace. But I challenge that if everyone thinks that resolving our conflict without also incorporating emunah, faith, I suggest to think again. No, there's such thing also as the only solution is. Even the solution I'm going to be talking about is not the only solution. And I'm not going to define for anyone what's going to be in the future. And I suggest that all of us will be modest and leave something for the future for Hashem Ishtabach Veit Allah. And peace between neighbors will not happen without peace at home. So it is imperative that the two people, the Palestinians and the Israelis, will go through a different internal process of dealing with their own unique internal problems. And only then, Be'ezrat Hashem, we can jointly clarify what we hope to create here and tie our destiny and future together. Not on the expense of the other, but with the other. And for something greater from us, greater from them, greater from Jews, greater from Israelis, greater from Palestinians. The full future aspirations of Am Yisrael, the national, the humane, the religious, and the universal, will not be realized without the Arabs and the Palestinians this way or another. And therefore, the Jewish interest is reconciliation with the Arabs and the Palestinians. But before reconciliation between neighbors on both sides of the wall, the haters of Israel must also be cut out from their hopes that the Jews will leave the land or any part of it. And also understand that the Arabs and Palestinians are also deeply rooted, Morabitin Hun, and to internalize both these perceptions. One must free himself from the mental fixation that has demanded peace now for decades and at any cost, and also from the mental fixation that advocates lack of initiative and non-intervention, and worse, leaving the intervention and the initiative to foreigners. Speaking of foreigners, welcome to US President Joe Biden tomorrow. But I will repeat what we say at the home for the beginning. Foreign governments, organizations, and stakeholders, including Israel's greatest friends, despite your goodwill, do not interfere in our land. Only let us Israelis and Palestinians to sit at the same table without your mediation or paradigms. So even if Biden will say tomorrow, hey, I'm going to give to the home $1 million, we will say no, because this is a red line. Foreign money is avodah zarah, and we want to have the inclusivity of the decision here for both Jews and Palestinians, not foreigners. Finally, sitting here with us tonight, our distinguished guests who have came all the way to participate. I ask to give each and every one of them the respect they deserve, but also to challenge and create controversy within the family, the Jewish and the Semitic family. I hope that this will be the start of conducting a real discussion, not a discourse that begins and ends in echo chambers. And I will finish with a quote, not from Winston Churchill, but from Rabbi Cook. Those who know why. Humans are mistakenly believing that peace in our world means that everybody will share the same worldview and think the same way. True peace, however, on the other hand, comes precisely from the prosperity of diverse conceptions, when all the different sides of the issue are exposed and we are able to clarify the place of each and every one. That is the meaning of true peace. Be'ezrat Hashem, shi'eh lanu b'hatzlacha.
I do want to mention that the first panel was really interesting to watch. I think everybody did a great job expressing themselves. It was the first time in a long time I've seen like a real passionate, robust debate over the two-state solution. You know, I don't hear that so much anymore. I think I live in a world where it's just taken for granted that there is no two-state solution anymore, and like it's just like a joke. So to hear people like really passionately trying to defend it was interesting to me. And I want to also point out that I felt that the two people here who were arguing in favor of a two-state paradigm were really coming from very different places. I think I heard a lot of empathy from Tila, like, and I think the way she described the way we act, the way our behavior impacts Palestinians, I think that really spoke to me. I think that was really true. I identified with it. I obviously don't agree with her conclusions, but I felt that was that was something deeply true that we need to address. Whereas I felt the other guy, what was his name? Shani, right? Okay, Shani. I was hearing we could just have a great white country if we can get rid of our Arabs and our mitnachlim and our Haredim, and we could be part of NATO, and we could have a first world standard of living, and that speaks to me a little bit less. And I think the answer to his question, where he was addressing a question like, why should we give up this first world standard of living and take responsibility for millions of Palestinians for what? What do we get? What do we get? What do we get? And I think the short answer to that is really we get our homeland, right? And that's not a small thing. And I think we have to understand that we came back to life and we returned to our land after 2,000 years, not to treat it like a commodity, not to treat it like a piece of real estate. This is our soulmate. This is and when we're talking about the West Bank, we're specifically talking about the places that we've really yearned to come back to for many, many, many centuries. And that's not something to give up so lightly. And I was a little bit I've heard that before, but when you hear it, it's a little difficult. And again, I think that moving forward and talking about solutions, we need to think less about our rights, I feel, and more about our obligations, our responsibility. I want to, I don't necessarily feel like I have a right to Shechem, like I have a right to Jenin, like I have a right to Hebron. I feel like I have a connection to those places, but I feel like I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to make sure there's justice in these places, in our entire land, in Gaza, for every single human being. Right? That for me, I think the framework of responsibility is a much more relevant framework than the framework of rights. In fact, I think rights can sometimes bring us to a very immature place. But responsibility is like a grown-up way of looking at these things. In terms of moving forward, for me, there's no solution but a one-state solution between the river and the sea, including Gaza. But I think the no solution can work right now. Not that solution, not the two-state solution, not the status quo, not confederation, not federation, not eight-state solution. There's no solution that could work right now because, unfortunately, the relationship dynamics are really bad. Right? Jews and Palestinians have been in a pretty violent ethnic conflict for over a century. And there's no solution you can slap on that to make it better. There's no replacement for real work that's going to change the relationship on the ground. That being said, even if there's no magic solution that could solve everything, there's a lot that we can do. And I think I also want to acknowledge something very important. My friend is sitting on this panel with me. Just because it's here doesn't make this a Jewish-Palestinian panel. Right, this is a Jewish space. Okay, the truth is, even if we had 10 Palestinians on these panels, it would still be a Jewish space that they are coming to. Okay, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's the truth. And I think we need to acknowledge that if you came here expecting a Jewish-Palestinian event, that's not what this is. This is a Jewish event, and Baruch Hashem, we have a guest, welcome guest, and I'm happy to see you here. I actually spent the day with speaking to a lot of other groups today, but I think we need to be honest with ourselves. We need to be honest with ourselves about what this is. We need to be honest with ourselves about the situation between Israelis and Palestinians in this country, and we need to be honest with ourselves about the fact that we have the power. The Israelis have the power. We are on top of them, and we can argue that if it was reversed, if they had the power, maybe we'd be dead. Could be, right? I've heard that argument, but we have the power. And we've done what we've done, and we are where we are. And in order to actually build trust, because right now we don't trust each other at all, in order to build trust, I think the first step is going to have to be made by us. That Israel is going to have to make the first move towards actually building trust, and that's scary for a lot of us. It's scary for a lot of Israelis because I think a lot of Israelis, whether they vote for Eretz or they vote for Likud or they vote for Itamar Ben-Gvir, I think a lot of Israelis really believe that the majority of Palestinians are essentially Nazis who just don't have the power to do what the Nazis did to us. And if you're coming from that perspective, then it's very hard to make the first move towards building trust. So for me, the only solution, the solution I want to get to, okay? Again, I don't start with what solution can work, because I think Yirmiyahu pointed out before, everything Zionism achieved in the last century looked what at best impossible, at worst insane. Is that the terminology? Right? And so we are a people, we have to understand something about ourselves. We're a people that achieves the impossible. Right? We're not a people that just does what's practical, what seems to be the most rational move right now. We have to start not from the perspective of what we can achieve, what's practical. We have to start from the perspective of what we want, what should be, what we think is just, what we think is the ideal future here, and then do everything in our power to move reality to that. And so I want to share what I believe the correct solution is, and then later maybe we'll talk about how we can get there. So for me, coming from the awareness that we all live in our subjective perceptions of reality, right? The way we perceive reality is how we experience reality. We're all having a very different experience right now because we all have different perceptions of tonight, this event. There are people up here, people down there, people with this baggage who read that book, who listened to this politician talk, who listens to this podcast. We're all coming with our subjective perceptions of reality and our own experiences. And Palestinians as a collective and Israelis as a collective also are coming with our subjective perceptions of the last 102 years of conflict. And we also have very different aspirations. We have very different core grievances. For me, the ideal solution is a one-state solution that is structured such that each of us experiences it as justice in our subjective perception of reality, okay? That means for me, not all Israelis, but for me, that means a deeply Jewish state, a state that expresses the identity and values of my people and its policies and institutions. I'm going to speak for Palestinians, but in my experience, what I've heard many Palestinians say to me is that they think the most just solution is just a democratic society in the entire land where everyone's equal and no one is privileged over anyone else. So the question that I want to ask my fellow panelists and you guys and myself is, can we create a one-state reality that is simultaneously both? Something that I can experience as a deeply Jewish state, or maybe those with Jewish education would see as a deeply Jewish state, while Palestinians and even maybe Jews without Jewish education can experience as just like an equal democratic society. Can we create that? And I think that it's a much different way of thinking. I think it's a much more Jewish way of thinking, to be honest. But that's the kind of political creativity I think we need in order to move forward. Right now, what we essentially have is a European-style nation-state with a bunch of superficial Jewish decorations. The state is way too Jewish for Palestinians and not Jewish enough for the Haredim. And Haredim are important because they are the fastest growing population between the river and the sea. Can we create, thank you, can we create a state that is not coming with a hard and shallow Jewish character, but with a deep and soft Jewish character? So those who really want a Jewish state see it everywhere, see it in how the economy is structured, see it in the minority rights, see it in the mechanisms of democracy, see it in the banking system, see it in our behavior, our foreign policies, like just see the Jewish values permeating our society and our policies. And those who are either not Jewish or not really educated in Jewish identity, Torah, Jewish history, etc., don't even know that it's Jewish, just see it as a democratic society that functions really well and is really just.
Hi, my name is Rafi. I work in biotechnology. I live in Jerusalem, Israel, with my wife and children, not too far from here. I've been here about 15 years. Since I was in university, I've been sort of on the side peace activist, doing dialogue between Jews and Muslims, mainly talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict. I've got involved in various different peace projects over the years. The Best Plans for Peace project, we were writing, everyone wrote different peace plans, and I got to meet some interesting characters here in Israel. I was involved in the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation project and the Federation movement with Emmanuel Shechef and Ari Hess. And we got to go to the Knesset a couple times and try to talk people into having a federation. And maybe a couple years ago, or maybe 2 years ago, I wrote with a Palestinian friend of mine named Zahir. We decided to write a plan for a federation. I was actually giving a talk on a YouTube channel. It was a debate over whether or not Jews or Palestinians were indigenous, because I work in DNA sequencing, deep sequencing. So I was arguing, listen, like they've dug over 90 skeletons out of the ground from over 3,000 years ago. You can sequence them and find that, you know, the majority of Jews and the majority of Palestinians, the majority of their ancestry come from the people who lived here thousands of years ago. And what's interesting about this conflict is that it's one of the only places in the world where two people think that they're the native population and they think the other groups are foreigners. That doesn't exist like in New Zealand, for example. The Maori people, they know they got here first. The descendants of the Dutch and the English who moved there, they know they got here second. And everyone's pretty clear about who is who. There's not a conflict over identity. Here, and weaponize, I like that phrase that I stole from you. I hope I can borrow it. So, yeah, they're using the idea that I'm from here and you're not as a tool to fight with each other. And so the two things basically I talk about in my proposal for a federation were a combination of this concept of mutual recognition of indigenous rights, recognizing that both people have these deep historical roots here, and then the idea of a federal solution. So when I say mutual recognition of indigenous rights, people, first of all, it's learning history, like explaining the historic connection of Jews and Arabs and Palestinians to this land from thousands of years and sort of educating people, but then also educating what does it mean to have indigenous rights. A lot of people say, well, I'm a native and the Palestinians are foreigners, therefore they don't have any rights. Like, that doesn't work in Australia. The Aboriginals know that the white people are colonialist immigrants and they were the natives. That doesn't mean that white people all have to leave Australia. That's like delusional, and both sides use this. They'll say this about the Palestinians. They're like, they all came here 150 years ago, therefore they don't have any rights here. This is just my land, since Abraham. And the Palestinians were like, no, I'm a descendant of the Canaanites. These people are just all European foreigners, like whatever, not even mentioning that most of them came from Arab countries, but it doesn't matter. They're a bunch of immigrants and they need to get out of my land. And so what is the point of having indigenous rights? The idea of indigenous rights in the modern concept is, how do you defend a vulnerable people like the Cherokee or the Apache or indigenous Aboriginals of Australia? You have small minority populations that were the descendants of the original people that lived here. They have been colonized in their own country and discriminated against, and now they're trying to preserve a sense of identity and a sense of the concept of a nation. So in the idea of indigenous rights, it's trying to deal with the problem of, you have a nation that lives inside of a much bigger, larger, modern democratic country. And how does that modern country, like the United States or Canada or Australia, deal with its indigenous population and relate to them as a nation? So what is it? An indigenous right, for example, is the right to call the whole country or a place based on your culturally authentic name. So I can call the place Hebron, and they can say it's El Khalil, and we're not in a conflict because that's my culturally authentic way to refer to the place. That's their way to refer to the place. I can call it Israel, they can call it Palestine, and I'm not in a fight. This is their right to say that, and it's my right to say how it is to me. So I feel like it's a concept to deal with the problem you have now in modern Israel, where we created a country called Israel, and we say there's no such thing as the Israeli nationality. There's no Le'um Israeli. There's no Israeli identity. You're either Jewish by nationality or Arab by nationality or Armenian, but there is a Jewish nationality. That's my ethnicity. I'm Yisrael, right? This is my nation. So we named the country after our nation, and we said it's the nation state, and then you have people who live there that aren't part of that nation. So what do they do? How do they handle? So what is their sense of identity? How do you protect their rights as a minority here? And then if you had all country together, how do I protect both? Like, now we're half Jewish and half Arab. What's the protection for my cultural rights? What's the protection for my indigenous rights to connection to the land, to have my national symbols, call things the historically authentic names, preserve my language, preserve my religion, my traditions, holidays, all this stuff. All this stuff you'd want to having a Jewish state that most people would say, this is why I want a Jewish state, so I can have my holidays and my flag and I can sing Hatikva. I'm like, you should be able to have that anyways. That's your right to live here. How do you create a country where they have the right to have their flag and their anthem and their holidays, and I have that too, and we're not at loggerheads? And the next thing that I talk about is, what is a federation? So federation is trying to answer that question on a political level and a bigger than dealing with indigenous rights, to deal with, you have nations that live in different parts of a country, and you're trying to balance between the motivation to have autonomy, to have self-determination, as you call it, and also to have access to more of the land for whatever reasons. Like, one of the reasons I think the two-state solution...
1 minute.
So one of those reasons two-state solution doesn't really work is because both sides wanted a state and a half. They wanted the country with their name on it. They both could have argued that it's really one country easily and made that case, but neither of them wanted to make that case because it was in their interest to have that autonomy. At the same time, they wanted access to the other side. So federation is trying to answer that question. And I guess maybe when I'm in my next turn, I'll get to talk about it a little more.
All right.
So that's kind of right.
Okay. So a couple of things before I'm going to get to the question of the solution. Number one, this conversation should be in Hebrew and in Arabic, more than it should be in English. What happens often, maybe it's a chance to study, but I think that the intelligent conversation about our future here together, Israelis and Palestinians, happening much more in English. So a lot of the ideas that I have the honor and the blessing to hear and to learn from are from people that speak English, unfortunately. I mean, not in a negative way. But the conversation here, what we have in Israel regarding, the land of Israel, Palestine, same thing, nafs ishi. It's a very shallow one. It's a conversation that doesn't think about what's going to be 1 year, 10 years, 20 years, but thinks about today and take away even the vision of what's going to be tomorrow. That's because we don't have leaders. We have technicians and managers, very good ones, but we don't have leaders. And a leader cannot be a leader without a vision to take his people forward. And if you ask me, a Jewish leader has to be one that incorporates also values from the Torah of Am Yisrael and the vision of the prophets. But the vision of the prophets is also mentioned in the Megillat HaAtzmaut, in the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, by Ben Gurion, who was not religious. And specifically, he did that. Why? Because although he wasn't a religious person, he was a believer. He believed that Am Yisrael came back because it was something that is connecting the Torah, the land, and the people, and Hashem, Ishtabach. Therefore, I personally believe that the guidelines or the outlines for the solution are already written. We just need to reflect them and translate them and adapt them to our times. And I think this is the challenge of our generation. And to do it in a way that's going to be with Palestinians as equals, not something that seclude them. And like Yirmiyahu here said in one of the videos, Nahna murabitin hun. But more than that, he said also that we haven't really given answer what is the place or the role of the non-Jew in the Jewish system. And like my friend Yehuda HaKohen said, the Palestinians are suffering from our identity crisis, from our problem of, people that have been in diaspora, in exile for 2,000 years, come back, and we still didn't really. It takes time to heal the scars on our national soul, how to become, part of this region again. And we are from the Middle East. We're not from the West. We're not from Europe. We're not from the USA. We are from here. So I'm going to go to the solution because I want also to give time, especially to our, not guest, but to our, Semitic brother here, to also speak his mind and his solution. But we need to identify the sources and the roots of the problem, which I believe is about, like Adiel said, ideology. Ideology. Adel. But the ideology is basically if I can phrase it,
It's like jewelry.
but the ideology and the problem of the ideology we are suffering from is the paradigm of the West, which is about separation, and the Jewish and Muslim paradigm that are about differentiation. Because everything is one, everything is whole, with the WH, whole. And you cannot do a separation of church and state, or religion and state, and the personal, not in Judaism and not in Islam. It's all intertwined. Why do we say in, before, we were, getting married, אם אשכחך ירושלים תשכח ימיני תדבק לשוני לחכי אם לא אזכרכי. Why? Because the nationalistic and the personal and the religious are all in one. And we didn't came back to this land for Tel Aviv. We came back because of Yerushalayim, Har HaBayit. Now, regarding the solution, I'm going to be short. The solution that we promote in HaBayit is basically the restoration of Israeli sovereignty, gradually, to Judea and Samaria. Gaza, in this point, should not be included, but in the future, everything is open for discussion and conversation. And basically to incorporate Palestinians that want to connect and tie their future with Am Israel and the state of Israel as equals. I mean, there's no way that we're gonna restore our sovereignty and have people with, less rights and obligations as us. There's no way. As a matter of fact, I will argue that we also, as Jews, should do more obligations, but this is also an open conversation. Now, if we look and we ask ourselves, what is the deep model that can make a Jewish state a Jewish state? There's none but the kingdoms of Israel. The kingdom of Yehuda, the kingdom of Israel, the northern, the united one, the kingdom of the Hashmonaim.
1 minute.
1 minute?
1 minute.
But it's me.
It goes fast.
But the kingdom of Israel was also one state with federation, נחלות של שבטים, regions of different tribes that have different roles under the same frame. And the main thing that I'm going to end, I spoke about the Torah, to incorporate ideas from the Torah to our time. It's not a coincidence that the Torah is specifically mentioning the most, the value that returns the most. It's not Shabbat, it's not Mikdash. It's the treatment to the other, to the ger. And that's also, or maybe more so, what makes a Jewish state a Jewish state. These are questions we need to handle, and Be'ezrat Hashem, inshallah. And I will finish with saying that we cannot do this process. It should be both inner Israeli Jewish conversation, but I believe that the Palestinians are actually teaching us about our roots, like a stick in the hand of Kadosh Baruch Hu.
Here we have 2 for one state and 1 for confederation, 1 for federation. So I just want to clarify, what is the difference between a federation structure and a confederation structure, and why is it important in each of your minds?
Okay. A federation is essentially one country. You have one passport. The United States, for example, began as a confederation. It was a perpetual union. It was an agreement by all these territories. They first in the declaration declared themselves to be independent. And then they said, if anybody attacks one of us, they attack all of us. We have an agreement to defend each other, but they each had their own army, and they were each like their own country. And then, after a while, they said, this isn't strong enough. We wanted to make a union that has I'll think of the Constitution of the United States, where you have one passport, you are one country, and you have one army, essentially. That is going beyond that I defend you and you defend me, that we put on the same uniform and we fight together. We have one flag, or you can, in theory, have a country with 2 flags. That's sort of my proposal, but that's the basic difference of a confederation versus a federation. One of the challenges, I would say, administratively in a confederation model is, let's take the city where you live in Beit El. Beit El, if that was on the Palestinian side, nobody who lives in Beit El is a citizen of Palestine. So then what's the motivation for the state of Palestine to enrich and fix your roads and take care of the school system and manage Beit El for your best interest? So I think everywhere you are, you should be a citizen of the region you're in, and then of the federation you're in, administratively. And then defensively, you're talking about if you have a confederation, you have two countries, each one of them has their own army. And I don't buy this that Palestinians would be demilitarized. They have, in Gaza, they have a stronger military than half the countries in Europe. So they're not unmilitarized, and Odmat in Jenin, they're going to have quite an army there as well. They're quite militarily industrious. They would have an army, and we would have an army, and we would have to be sworn to defend each other with our two armies. I think makes just more sense. Why don't we just take all of our young 18-year-olds, make them run miles, or make them do push-ups together, and make them become one army and swear to defend each other as brothers in arms? That's actually a safer model. While it seems more frightening, I think that's why I'm a federationalist. A lot of my best friends are confederationalists. I think that's definitely progress, better than not.
Okay, so very quickly, because I do want to leave enough time for the audience to ask any questions that they need, do any of the panelists have any questions for another one of the panelists on what was said here? Okay. Okay.
So I want to clarify first and foremost that what I spoke about is my personal opinion. Habayit is something more general. We must give people the space to bring their unique voices. So it's very important for me to mention. When I speak also about ideas from the Kingdom of Israel, I'm not talking about regression. I'm talking about actually progression, but translation of old values to our time and to include them in the modern state of Israel. Difference between one state and two state, or federation and confederation, basically why I support a model that incorporates federation or federal model. I will read to you the following from Ezekiel 47, and I'll say it in Hebrew because it's important. שפת הקודש אחרי הכל. וחילקתם את הארץ הזאת לכם לשבטי ישראל, והיה תפילו אותה בנחלה לכם ולהגרים הגרים בתוככם, אשר הולידו בנים בתוככם, והיו לכם כאזרח בבני ישראל, איתכם יפלו בנחלה בתוך שבטי ישראל, והיה בשבט אשר גר הגר איתו, שם תיתנו נחלתו, נאום אדוני השם. You will see in the translation when we're going to release the video.
Yeah, for those of us who don't speak such Greek.
Basically speak about that when the people of Israel come back to our land, we divide the land again to regional areas, and in the same area where the non-Jew has brought babies and children to the world, this is where we give their own unique canton or emirate or nachala.
I think a lot of important ideas were touched upon here. Is there any more? Oh, thank you. I think a lot of important ideas were touched upon here. For me, I cannot get on board with confederation because for me that just sounds like a repackaging of the two-state solution. And I'm not capable of going there. And I think that the truth is, for a lot of Israeli society, that's, I don't know about Palestinian society, I don't want to speak for them, but for a lot of Israeli society, that's impossible. Just like the two-state solution is impossible. Even no matter what polls say, people aren't going there. But I think that, again, for me, the focus is really how we find ways to live together and create structures that we simultaneously experience as representing us. Like one thing that I think mentioned is very important is Gaza as this like densely populated piece of territory with humanitarian crisis, like just from how densely populated it is, and it's full of refugees. Right? I know that ultimately one thing we're going to have to deal with is the refugee issue. We're going to have a conversation about refugees. I have to be very clear that for us, like or I'll speak for myself, there is no possibility of allowing foreign sovereignty, like meaning non-Jewish sovereignty, anywhere in this land. No possibility. Like there's war, holy war. Right? If any other nation tries to have political sovereignty over a piece of this land, war. And that's the only option we have. I think what was said earlier on the first panel, that we never tried a two-state solution, right? And we never tried peace, or we did try peace, and we did try a two-state solution. I think the problem is the two get tangled up a lot. The two-state solution we tried many, many, many times. But in my opinion, Israel has not once attempted to make peace. Israel has not once actually offered Palestinians peace in a real, honest, genuine way. And if I were to tell you that we can divide this land or we can make a two-state of any kind here, I'd be lying, because we can't. And there's at least 1 million Jews who think like me, and they have lots of kids and lots of guns. So, like, honestly, that's not where the world is going. But I think we have to figure out ways to live here together as winners. And I think for Gaza, I think presents us with a laboratory for trying to address the refugee question. I think that obviously there's no such thing as a solution without Gaza. If it were up to me, I think that Israel should offer every single refugee family in Gaza the option of either staying where they are or going back to Yafo, going back to Haifa, going back to Beersheba, going back to Akko, and having Israel build for them brand new luxury apartments that they will own, that they will be theirs. No mortgage, no nothing. It's a way to redistribute wealth. It's a way to address the fact that this is a problem that was caused largely by us, and it's a way to alleviate the population crisis in Gaza. Palestinians who would like to go back, probably not to the house that their great-grandparents lived in, but to the neighborhood, to a brand new luxury apartment built by Israel, will be owned by them, somewhere around there. And if we're relating to this as one state anyway, then it doesn't matter to me whether a Palestinian is living in Gaza or living in Yafo or living in Akko, because it's all one country anyway. And it's a way to acknowledge that we did something that we have to make good on and trying to achieve justice.
All right, thank you guys. I'm going to open the floor now to questions. Here, you in the front.
Now, I want to use Yehuda's phrase. Specifically, this is a question to you described you want Palestinians to feel like winners in this solution. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the way you describe it, you want Palestinians in Israeli society to be like Druze or Circassians, a very patriotic but integral minority within the population. Now, would you specifically feel like a winner if under any solution there was no Palestinian identity connotated to any sovereign land in any state from the river to the sea? Now, to use his phrase, Israeli sovereignty from the river to the sea.
Hold on, I want to just point out that you might have paraphrased me a little bit there.
Yeah.
Because there are a couple of things that I half agree with what you said. I could use the microphone, I guess. Sorry. Just give me a sec here. I would say that the reason why you brought up the Druzim, for example, right? The Druzi population. First of all, I want to say that I don't believe that Palestinian identity should not be expressed in the state. I actually think that Palestinian identity should be expressed in the state. And I think there should be shared layers of identity. I think we each have layers of identity. I'm a Kohen, I'm an Israeli, I'm a Jew, I'm a Semite, I'm a human. Like, I have layers and layers of identity, and some of those layers of identity I can share with and other Palestinians, right? I think one thing we should appreciate, one of the reasons why Palestinians and Israelis have such an easy time denying the identity of the other is because we have such different conceptions of identity and what national identity means. And I think that that's actually a good thing. I think it's hopeful for me, because the fact that we have such different conceptions of what national identity actually means actually might mean that we can both have our national identities expressed in a one-state reality. So I didn't say no expressions of Palestinian identity. And in terms of the Druzim, I think ultimately, if we take away all of the lipstick, if we take away all of the like the ways we try to describe our relationship with the Druzim, like right now when we talk about the Jewish state and non-Jewish populations here, we're thinking either about separating it, balkanizing it into different nation states, or sharing one civic national identity called Israeli, like Canadian or whatever. And that's not going to happen here either. Like, we learned last summer that when we talk about what it means to be an Israeli, whether you're talking to Jews in Lod or Bat Yam or Hebron or Beit El or wherever, most Israelis, when they say Israeli, what they really mean, the children of Israel.
is there a scenario where you would feel represented, still feel represented by the state, but that there's no Palestinian, like, national character to that state? If I was understanding your...
That's my question. Why shouldn't there be a Palestinian national character to the state? If it's one state that we share, I'm not talking about a civic national identity, okay? I think this is what's difficult for people because we're talking about new frameworks. Every time we've had power in history, we've created something new to offer to the world, including the concept of a weekend, right? Like, we came back to life after 2,000 years, again, to offer something new to the world, new conceptions of how peoples can live together in a country. The real reason I think that the Drusim are having a better time than the Palestinians in this country is because beneath all of whatever words we throw on top of it, what the Drusim are really experiencing is they're allies of the Hebrews in a land where the Hebrews are dominant, right? That's what they're experiencing at the end of the day. They're experiencing themselves as allies of us in a land where we're strong. And that makes them feel secure. Right? And we respect them. And when they come to the army, they're told, oh, you're Israelis too, and that might feel a little bit awkward, and what does that mean to be an Israeli too? But I think we can have different identities in one country, still feeling that we're equal and allies creating that country. It's a good question, but I think it requires clarification because you were jumping off something I had said, and I want to make sure that I'm understood. That in when we talk about Jewish identity, what we mean is basically the descendants of a specific set of ancestors and tribes that existed here thousands of years ago, that moved through history, that left Egypt, etc. Right? Like, that's Jewish identity is defined a certain way, and it's a very primordialist national identity, which doesn't exist in a lot of places today. Palestinian identity, by contrast, is really the indigenous peoples of Palestine throughout time, right? And I think those two identities can coexist simultaneously and not come into friction with each other because they are so different.
All right, let's move on to another question. You and then you afterwards. Yeah. After.
Hi, my name is Ateret Shmuel. I'm the director of an organization called Indigenous Bridges, which essentially creates connections between indigenous tribal nations throughout the world. And the concept of indigeneity has become like a buzzword thing that people talk about now because it has currency within certain movements. But there's not a lot, I find that people use it in whatever way fits their agenda. So for the purposes of our organization and the way that we support indigenous peoples throughout the world, we've taken a sort of modified version of Martinez Cobo's definition as a people who have an ethnogenesis from within a specific land space, who have historical ties to that land that predate colonial contact, who have a unique language, dress, culture, tradition, spiritual framework that is connected to that people and that land, and the desire to pass them on to future generations. And according to that definition, there are people who very clearly fit it, and there are people who don't necessarily. And blood is not necessarily an indicator of indigeneity. DNA is not necessarily an indicator of indigeneity, although it does have some import there. But just as people can convert to Judaism, people can also be adopted by, like, the Lakota, for example. And so attributing indigenous identity only to matters of blood and genetics, I don't think does it service. But that's not really my question. My question is, I actually also worked with Rav Feldman and Roots and have a history way back of a lot of this, like, Jewish, Muslim, Arab, Israeli grassroots peace work, and burnt out. I burnt out. It is, if the longer you're in it, the harder it becomes to really figure out if there's a way to move forward, regardless of whether or not I have deep, deep, loving friendships and almost like family ties. But really, when it comes down to it, especially over the last 15 years, there's a huge increase in propaganda. No, I'm getting to the question. And the propaganda is so pervasive throughout society. How do you propose to deprogram that? Because it has become such an integral part of Palestinian identity and a response also within Israeli society to that.
really good question.
You touched a very important topic, which is the change, how we change the dynamics, the prevailing dynamics that basically has so many obstacles toward advancing towards peace. First, we need to meet each other on the ground, but to have in these meetings no mediation from foreigners, no intervention from foreign entities, and have especially people that live in the heart of the conflict, like Jews from the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, from Hebron, from Yitzhar, from Beit El, but also to have Palestinians who are representing the deep Palestinian story, like the Jewish story, Palestinians living in refugee camps. I think this is a very important part of the Palestinian society that need to meet these Jews in the same table with an atmosphere that we don't come there to blame each other or to play who is more victim, and also to speak the language of the other. And you know what? The language of the other, if we don't know the language, like linguistics, the language that we need to use is the language of Hashem. And I find it something that creates a very different atmosphere between Jews and Palestinians when you do it. And of course, to clean the hate. Clean the hate is very good. Butt goes down, butt goes up. And it's good for the sports. It's also, a way to get people to the same place together and to create there also the atmosphere to get to know each other without flags, without slogans, without noise and the drums of the peace industry that I don't really like. I think you can tell. And yeah, to get to know each other on the ground, on equal terms.
You want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'll briefly address the issue of indigeneity that you brought up. I tend to go with the definition of indigeneity is that there's no official definition of indigeneity, but the group that created the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People had sort of a guidelines of peoples that had lived in a land previously, that had a historical connection to the land, cultural connection to the land, and then were subject to some kind of invasion by an outside power and subjugated in some way. And this happened, in my opinion, both to the Jewish people historically by, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Greeks, and many other people, and the Crusaders. And then the Palestinians also, there was Arabs living here. They were invaded by the Crusaders, then the Mamluks, the Turks, then the British, and then the Zionists took over. So they also were suffering under mechanisms of imperialism by foreign countries much more powerful than them. So both groups, and the purpose of indigenous rights, in my opinion, is to protect vulnerable groups and allow them to preserve their culture in the place that they came from, in a framework where they're no longer powerful, and that's why you have indigenous rights. Now, in terms of how you get people to stop hating each other, in my opinion, that's called reconciliation. You have to. I would say the most powerful thing that we could do besides building walls and shooting missiles is to say I'm sorry for the things you did wrong. And if you want to start with what I would say the first thing that was done wrong was somewhat minor, you could say, was when the Zionists came here and they started purchasing lands. They didn't realize the internal politics of what was going on. The Turks were running a policy very similar to what was happening to the Jews back in Russia. We had Russification, where they were trying to make everyone Russian. They would take young men and put them in the army for a long time and torture them and try to get them to convert to Christianity and try to make them good, Orthodox Russians. A similar process was going on here with the Turks onto the Arabs. And so Muslim Arabs, because they could be drafted, started selling property to foreigners, mainly in Egypt, so that they wouldn't be on the record and so they couldn't draft their children. And this is why a lot of this property was all of a sudden available for sale. And when the Zionists moved here, they bought a lot of this property and displaced a lot of the Arab labor, and they were like, we need to have Jewish labor. And when you move to a new country and you displace a lot of people who are working, and now they can't find a job, so you're going to get a lot of traction. There was a couple of minor, Battle of Tel Chai and a couple of minor attacks by the Arabs until about 1929, where this guy Hajj Amin al-Husseini started saying that we were trying to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the Jews and the Kotel, where the Jews have been praying for hundreds of years, was really, was El Barak Plaza and was really part of the temple, and they would throw rocks at the Jews, and they massacred the Jewish population of Hebron and Sfat, or Safed, as the Arabs would call it. And then this led to another incident in the in the 1936, they started the Great Revolt in Jerusalem and all over the country, and they were. It wasn't just that they were fighting it for political reasons, as some of the Palestinians, and their advocates would start saying. This was sort of a religious fanaticism driven by, religious fundamentalists. Even the mayor of Jerusalem was an Arab, and the Arab police force in the country was fighting on the side of the Zionists against the sort of religious fanatics, something like an ISIS that were literally like trying to massacre the Jews. And after that happened, the Irgun was formed, and they had a very heavy-handed response. They also started killing innocent Palestinians over another 10-year period leading up to 48. So it's not like it magically happens in 48. There's a 28-year civil war leading up to 1948, and ultimately, we killed, several hundred civilians. Both sides killed several hundred civilians in the course of this civil war, and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled this conflict. And for both sides to admit what happened, admit their part in it, and instead of trying to justify how the other side, they started it, and really it's not my fault, it's not going to get you anywhere. You really have to say, I'm sorry for what we did, and let's try to move forward. And I think to make that genuine, and that's what ends the hate, in my opinion.
Okay, last comment on indigeneity, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Right. I think the definition that Teret presented on indigeneity is a true definition, but it's not the only definition. And I'm not sure that it's the most relevant definition to our situation, because another definition of indigeneity is a pre-colonial population that was displaced by a colonial act and excluded from the state that was created on top of them, right? And I think that in this moment, Palestinians fit that definition of indigeneity a lot better than we do. We have to be honest. I think that's my central message, honestly, is to be honest. And that's something we haven't been doing. One of the reasons I believe that this conflict has lasted as long as it has is because we're not honest. We're not honest with ourselves. We're not honest with each other. That's one of the reasons I wanted to say very clearly. We can't accept any kind of two-state, even if it's called a confederation. We can't accept it. We're just gonna fight. I am willing to go really far to find ways to make a one-state reality inclusive of Palestinians, where you're totally equal to us. But the minute that a Palestinian or anybody, a British person, a Jerusalem, doesn't matter who, the minute somebody says they want political sovereignty over parts of this land, we have no option but war. And I don't want you to be my enemy. I don't want Palestinians to be my enemy. If I were to say anything else to you, I'd be dishonest. And I'm speaking for a big sector of this country, and that's something. That's something we need to take into consideration. We need to also acknowledge, when we're being honest, that most of this is our fault, not yours. Meaning, most of what's been going on, the Zionists didn't know that they were doing what they were doing to you. A lot of things that, when Palestinian violence began in the 1920s and 30s, I don't think it came out of nowhere. I don't think it was just like Ukrainian pogroms. Like, that's the way that's what we told ourselves. We told ourselves it's like Ukrainian pogroms, but here. I think it was really a response to us behaving like colonizers, right? Just like, I think Teret mentioned to me yesterday, like and I've heard this from a lot of people, like a person can't be a colonizer in their own land, right? Like an indigenous people can't be colonizers in their own land. I don't agree with that. Just like a Jew can eat a pig, it might not be an expression of my identity, it might be a betrayal of my identity, but I could eat the pig. I think that I'm also capable of being a colonizer in my own land as a verb. And I think that we, Israeli society, I think the big challenge that we have right now is confronting the fact that a lot of this is our fault, and that we've been behaving like something that's a betrayal to our identity. And part of moving forward is going to require us to not just acknowledge that, but actually dismantle the colonial features of the state of Israel.
Okay, very interesting. Next question.
So first of all, my name is Avi. I just wanted to say thank you for organizing this event. For me, these are like extremely painful conversations, but I'm happy that it's happening, it's taking place, and thank you for coming, and thank you for the honesty, because I agree that there's not a lot of honesty. Even I live in Tel Aviv, 17 years, there's not a lot of honesty. here's my view, and I'd like to hear what you think, and maybe you, Rafi, about it, and what everyone else thinks about it. So for me, I come to you a little bit hopeless and a little bit tired from this entire situation. I used to be an activist in university, a Zionist activist. Today I have children. I can't imagine 15 years from now my children having to deal with this mess. But I will say, to me, there is no one's really mentioned the Abraham Accords. To me, this is actually a huge source of hope, because I think, as you said, leadership is everything, vision is everything, and I think the Arabs in particular have really been failed by the leaders around them. I mean, we don't live in a great neighborhood, but I do think that there are leaders in the Arab world. They're just not in Egypt, and they're definitely not in Jordan, where you have a dictator of a minority, who's a minority running another population. So my question is this: I think personally, the end state confederation or federation, to me, I think the big issue is trust. So here's my view. I think there's no management. There's a serious management problem in the Palestinian Authority, and I wonder if you agree with me or not, and if that's the view. But that's how I view it, and I'm pretty sure most of us view. There's also management issues here, 6 elections or whatever. But there's a real problem with management, and I think as an intermediary, I wonder. I know, I hear Inon talk about. Being from the land, being here, being close, and obviously, Bill Clinton from Arkansas has really no connection to this place, right? But the Emiratis have some connection. Soon in the next days, Joe Biden is going to Saudi Arabia, and I wonder from you if you think that whether it's Saudi Arabia, who currently control the Waqf, currently control Mecca, they have a very serious place in Islam. I wonder if you think, as an intermediary solution, if Arabs, Palestinians would accept an authority as a temporary authority, actual leaders who have run a country, are real operators of countries, whether it's the Saudis or the Emiratis or a combination of that, if they would accept it as a temporary solution, because clearly I don't believe that Israel will be able to. I don't believe that we can have authority over Arabs. I think Arabs need to work with Arabs. So that's my question. I wonder if you think there's a leadership problem or there's a management problem, and I wonder if you think that as a temporary solution that would be acceptable.
Thank you so much.
Let's make each and every answer not more than 1-2 minutes to give also more chances to more people to answer. If I understood your question, the answer I think is number one, foreigners like any place, also the Arabs in the Arab, even the Emirates, they have no say about what's going to happen in our land. And also Palestinians are not represented by the Emirates. But, however, the Abraham Accords was actually a very good move to promote peace. Why? Number one, it takes away the carpet from the legs of the Palestinian Authority, the corrupted and dictatorship body that don't represent nowadays the Palestinian people. And also, it takes the power that the PA had, or Fatah, or Hamas, or the PLO, from stopping making progression and connection between Israel and its neighbors, and to take away their political power, which I think they should be taking their political power, the Palestinian Authority and the PLO. Most of them. I can't say that all of the PA is corrupt and bad, but most of them, I think, need to move on or move out. Anyway, and also another good thing that it made, it caused Israelis and Jews to less be afraid of Arabs.
Even the most left-wing central Jews
Right.
are racist against them. Not because they hate them, but that's their experience.
No, but especially more to right-wingers that think that all of the Arabs are potential enemies, potential terrorists, potential killers. And this thing, I think for Palestinians one day, will appreciate the Abraham Accords because they reduced the amount of fear that we have from Arabs in general.
Okay, I agree with Inon that the Abraham Accords was a positive thing in the sense that a lot of Israelis realize we don't really hate Arabs, and Arabs are kind of cool, and that's kind of progress. I would agree with that. I don't think that the United Arab Emirates or the Saudi Arabians are going to take over the power of the Palestinian Authority. I don't think that's a realistic replacement. But I think what it's going to take is a grassroots movement. I think the fact that the majority of Israelis and the majority of Palestinians couldn't sit and agree on what kind of future we'd want. But if you have a movement of some kind for a confederation or a federation or one state or whatever it is, that at least the majority on both sides were in favor of and really believed in, that was realistic, that would, the wheels of politics would move in the favor. And and then maybe the Saudis and the Emiratis can help, encourage everyone and be good go-betweens, but they're not going to replace the Palestinian Authority. Okay, that's my opinion.
Okay. Next question. Yeah. I think that's what we should do.
Thank you. So my name's Jonathan, or Johnny. I'm a doctor from London. When I'm in the land, I volunteer for Physicians for Human Rights in both Israel proper and the Palestinian territories as well. First, I just want to say a massive thank you. I follow many of you on social media, so to have the opportunity to listen to you guys speak and debate and be present in the room with you, I'm really grateful for. So thank you. I love the merchandise and I want to try and get a cup too. So I've got two things. I'll be as concise as I can. One is to Harav, and one is to Inon, but of course everyone is welcome. I'd be interested in your thoughts. And please accept my apology in advance if I misinterpreted what I think you said. So I think one of the things that I feel is important, notwithstanding the importance that religion has in both people's identities and expressions and beliefs, but I think it's also important to not only hold space, but also to value the expressions and identities of the non-religious Jews, Israelis, Arabs, Palestinians, because they are a sizable minority, and some, depending on some polls, possibly even a majority. And I don't think they're any less passionate about their identity and any less capable of finding common ground with each other and finding solutions together. So I think sometimes what I hear is a lot of focus on the religious aspects is being possibly more important, and I just think we need to just be mindful of that in the discussions that we have. The second thing, directly to Inon and the position of Habayit. So I really agree with a lot of the things. I think from all four of you, I've heard similar things to kind of be against foreign intervention. So whether that's influence, whether it's finances, I completely, I'm agreeing with this. What role do you feel that those of us who live in the diaspora, whether we're descendants of Palestinians, whether we're descendants of Israelis, whether we're Jews who currently have a right of return, or Palestinians with a hopeful, inshallah, one day can have a right of return, what value do you think we have in the diaspora? How do you think we can help the movement? There's things that I do already back home, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on what role we can have.
Really lovely questions.
Thanks, Jonathan, right? Right. Well, I'll throw out a quick answer to the question you directed at Inon. You might have meant his question for me and my question for him, but I would say that I think diaspora Jews and Palestinians have a lot to contribute. I think that needs to be separated very clearly from foreign governments, Christian evangelicals, like foreign actors. From my perspective, we want Jews and Palestinians like driving the direction we go in. That includes diaspora Jews and diaspora Palestinians, but that's very different from like the government of Germany or Pastor Hagee or whatever. So that just needs to be a clear distinction, at least for me. Can answer his perspective. In terms of the other thing you said, I think that part of our problem is applying Western political framings or social framings to Israeli society. Even the concept of religious and secular is a very Christian construct. I think from a Jewish perspective, and I don't mean a Jewish religious perspective. I'm saying from the perspective of our ancestors before they were colonized and displaced from here, there wasn't such a thing as a religious Jew. All right, there was the Jewish people, or maybe the Hebrews, the children of Israel. We had a certain worldview, we had a certain culture, we had a certain identity, a certain historiography, and I think a lot of that, and I'm sure you've seen videos about this already, so I don't need to like explain the whole thing or give a history lesson. But I think basically we took a portable version of our destroyed civilization, and when the French and the Germans offered us inclusion, we kind of transformed it into a religion called Judaism. Now we've come back. That's part of our colonization. So I think we need to get away from thinking in terms of religious Jews and secular Jews. And I think even right and left are applied very poorly, and conservative and liberal are applied very poorly to the society. I think we need new framings for understanding our own identity, etc. But I do think that you just like, if I understand the Jews you're calling religious and Jews you're calling secular, if you mean those Jews who are like deeply connected to like their identity, their history, their roots in the land, versus those who just want to be an outpost of Western civilization, I think those who are connected to our identity have a lot more to contribute than those who just want to be the 51st state or whatever.
Regarding the role of the Jews and Palestinians in the diaspora, very important. I mean, when I say foreigners or foreign intervention, I'm differentiating between Jews and Palestinians that also have their roots in this land, and also have role in designing our land's future. Now, the problem is, I think that in the diaspora, maybe it could be more possible regarding freedom of speech to meet and to have conversations, but I think that the anti-normalization movement is so strong that it affects especially Palestinian communities from even meeting with Jewish communities in the diaspora. But I hope that we can do something like that, and to begin from the personal connections. You know, this is also how a Beit began, from personal. It didn't begin from any other intervention or whatever. It began from personal connection between a Jew and a Palestinian that want to know the reality of the other in a real way. That's how it should be also in the diaspora. I would say, and I would advocate to copy and use the methods that we do in Habayit also outside. I don't know, with the same vision, because, you know, the conversation also in the diaspora and the conversation here is very different. But we need to really have a radical listening to each other. And we need to do it also in the diaspora. And this is also the place to give a shout out to John, and also to Nasser, and to Eitan, and everyone that, part of Habayit, that working from the diaspora. And yes, it's intertwined. We cannot separate between the diaspora and the land.
Just, Jonathan, I'm going to throw one more answer out at you, because I realized that this is really crucial. One of the problems with I think one of the barriers to the more westernized camp approaching peace is just like Zionism utilized a lot of methods of colonialism. Zionism also utilized very European notions of nationalism, which is a very hard nationalism that I think has become a barrier to us imagining a different kind of future with Palestinians. Like Tehila on the first panel talked about the Zionist trilemma. I think so did Shani. Yeah, the Zionist trilemma. You can either have 2 out of 3, the land, democracy, the Jewish state, and I think we should take a different approach, that maybe the failure of the 2-state solution is an opportunity for us to reimagine ways to have a Jewish state that's not based on European nationalism, not a hard national identity, that it is also democratic and inclusive without trying to gerrymander an artificial Jewish majority, just give away those mountains that our ancestors have been trying to come back to for 2,000 years because there's too many Arabs on them, right? But to actually figure out a way to have the whole land with an inclusive democratic system that empowers everybody and is deeply Jewish. So I think that if we move away from those European understandings of nationalism, then we'll have less barriers, and we could even figure out a national anthem we could share, a national anthem that equally expresses Jewish and Palestinian identity in a way that we both feel fully expressed, not in a way that I'm half expressed in this anthem, but I'm fully expressed and Palestinians are fully expressed in that anthem.
All right, so unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. But thank you all so much